everyone, so this video is going to be a watercolor tips video, kind of like a tutorial walk through paint with me, and I'll give you some tips as I go and kind of talk through my whole process and why I do the things I do. And even if you're not looking for a tutorial, you can still kind of put this on in the background while you do some watercolor and maybe learn a couple things from it. This is just how I use watercolor. There's so many different ways to use it. There's no one specific way. Like, you can use an art supply however you want, but this is just my process, and I know it's going to evolve over time, and it's changed a lot since I started watercolor, but let's just get started. And first of all, this is a sketch I made on my iPad. It's a digital sketch. I really like to sketch digitally when I want to really plan out my drawings and have a concrete idea of what I want to do. And I would recommend doing a bunch of little thumbnails, like, you know, this, that's not sharpened, like this size, and do your little sketches and go through as many of those as you can. Pick your best one, make it bigger, and make your cleaner sketch on top. And then I just transferred it to Arch's hot press watercolor paper 300 GSM, and I used a Prismacolor color erase in the color terracotta, and I just traced over the lines using a light box. That's usually my standard process that I do. And I also planned out my colors on my iPad or digitally, or you can plan out your colors however you want. Make sure you know what colors you're going to use before you start painting, because your life will be so much easier. And so yeah, now I will just start. I guess first of all I should probably talk about my brushes. You want to make sure you get watercolor brushes because there are different kinds. There's some that are made for acrylic, some that are made for watercolor, some that are made for both. And the watercolor ones are meant to hold water. I think I just used synthetic ones. I'm not sure. I think this is synthetic. It's just a Zen brush. They're pretty cheap at my art store and they're usually on sale. And I like to have a bunch of different sizes. So there's like a small one, medium one, big one. I have an even bigger one if I want to do big washes, but the watercolor I'm using, I'm fairly new to it, and it bleeds into each other a lot more than I'm used to because it's the Shin ones, and they just spread more. That's just how they work. That's not clean, but that's actually okay. I don't need like a pure yellow. Okay, so here's my yellow. Probably want a lot of color. Add a little bit of brown to warm it up, and maybe, I can't remember, is this purple? Add a little bit of purple just to tone the yellow down. I'm just gonna start with the sky. This probably won't be dark enough. It'll probably dry a lot lighter than I'm envisioning, but I just want to start off light. Just go around. So it's a good idea to find a balance between the water and pigment. So like the more water you add, the more diluted your color will be, and the less water, the more concentrated it will be, but that's kind of very basic knowledge. And I find you want to go stronger than you think with watercolor. Like, you want it to be brighter than you want it to be, if that makes sense, because it will dry lighter. And I find the less water you use, it's kind of easier to tell what color it's going to end up being. And whenever I want it to blend into a lighter color, I rinse the color off my brush, and then you just kind of just go lightly over the edges that you want it to blend, have a smooth transition. So I kind of want all this to be smooth, so I'm going over it with some clear water. And I'm still getting used to the Shin watercolors, so might not have the most control over this paint yet. But there is some yellow coming in on the hill. So I'm going to let the yellow go on the hill, because when you lay watercolor on top of each other in different washes, the colors below it show through. So if you start with an underpainting, I guess, like a wash of a color, that will tint whatever you add onto it, or darken or shade. Also, the ferret creature has a bit of yellow, so I'm just kind of like establishing the mood, I guess. I do it a little bit differently each time, just depending on what, just like how I decide to do it that day. Some days I like to drop all the colors in, some days I like to take it section by section, but I find working on it all at once and building up the painting all together will help it be more unified. Because if you just do little areas and just zone in on little spots, it's not gonna feel very unified. I guess I'll do the trees. I already have some green on my palette. I think I might actually use this and just darken it. What is that? I think that was a piece of eraser. I have a really dark, what is that? What is this? It's like a dark blue, I guess? Or is it phthalo blue? What is this? Oh, it's phthalo. I don't know what color this is, but I think it's the one I want to use. I think it might just be dark blue. And this is actually very similar to my digital sketch. I'm not going to wet the paper first because I don't have the most control over these specific watercolors yet. I probably should do the green of the hill first, now that I'm thinking about it. I should probably do that. Because this is overlapping that, and if it's overlapping, I want it to go last. So this color is fairly saturated, so I want to have enough color. And I really should have a piece of swatch paper. That's pretty close, actually. I'm going to use that. I know it'll dry differently anyway, but I'm just going to use it. It might be too bright, but we'll see in the end how everything looks. And I only want it here. I don't want it to get on the ferret's tail because that's going to have a highlight, and I want this area to be a bit darker. I also use watercolor very loosely. It kind of tightens up in the end, but I like to start loose. You're kind of forced to because it's water. So it doesn't matter if I overlap these trees here because they're going to be covered anyway, but I don't want there to be too harsh of an edge. So I'm going to take some clear water and go around the edge here. I really like this green I was able to achieve. I'm still getting used to these watercolors, as I've mentioned many times, and they just keep proving themselves really good paints. So I might actually incorporate some dry brushing on the hill here. I think that could be interesting. And try not to go back in and touch areas. Like if you want more color there, don't do it until it's dry because you're going to end up messing up what you did. The best thing for watercolor is to just let it dry, see how it looks, and then rework it because you will mess it up. Not always, but it's really easy to mess it up if it's partially dry, and then you put a bunch of wet color on it. And I'm gonna just go around the edge here to soften it with some clear water. So right here in these trees, I'm gonna work here because the sky is pretty much dry. So I'm gonna take some of my dark blue. And this is pretty much the color I need. It might be a little more green and a little more dull. And if you think you have too much water, you can always dry it off on the paper towel. I do that quite a lot. Helps you control how much paint and water you're putting on the page. And I'm just gonna paint the trees here in the shape that I sketched them in, but there's no need to go into detail because they're quite far in the distance, and that will just take away from the main focus, and you can't really see details in the distance anyway when you're looking at a photo. You just can't naturally see that far. So keep that in mind. It's like a brighter blue, more of a turquoisey green color. The first layer of watercolor can look kind of bad. Just push through. There's always a point where you're gonna think it's not gonna turn out, and I learned that it just takes time. You just have to keep working on the painting, and eventually it will come together once all your values and the details and everything starts to pull together, because this looks nothing like my sketch. Even though I put the colors in, it doesn't look like my sketch yet because this might need to be darker, this might also need to be darker. It's not resembling what it's going to be, so just keep pushing. Don't give up until you're actually done, because it's going to look totally different when you're done. And that's something that took me so long to learn. I'm going to do these trees now so I can get the dark value in. And I can't decide if I want to do the trunks first or the branches, but I'm just going to do the branches. And let's do a little swatch of that. Yeah, that's pretty close to what I want. So I'm just going to look at my sketch and try to follow the forms. Watercolor is such a versatile medium, that's why I love it so much. It's, first of all, very quick, which I appreciate. You can be as detailed or as loose as you want. You can make it opaque, you can keep it translucent. You can add tons of texture by putting other objects on it like salt and cling wrap and using a sponge to apply it. There's just so many things you can do. You can scratch into the surface and create darker lines that way. I only really like to do that for more like still life stuff, but it's still such a mind-blowing technique I didn't even know was possible. Also, if you can, doing watercolor on a tilted surface, or any art for that matter, is always easier because you can see, because right now I'm sitting at an angle and I can't really see the painting. It's kind of skewed because I'm closer to the bottom of it and farther away from the top. So it's hard to really visualize it, but since I'm following a sketch, it's easier, and I keep sitting up a little bit more so I can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm trying to keep it loose here. I'm not doing like a big flat wash. I'm purposely going in with brush texture and using kind of like rounded swooping motions. So it's not going to be fully flat. It's going to have blotches and little brush marks, and I probably should have painted to the bottom here, but that's fine. I would recommend you paint to the edge to get a clean edge, but I plan on trimming that off anyway. And this will also be a print in my store if you want to grab it. The thing about the Schmincke watercolors, or Schmincke or Schmincke, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but the thing about them is that they have really nice gradations between colors when you mix them together and have like a gradient of color on your paper. It's just a really nice thing about the paint that I've noticed, and it's just really nice to work with because once it dries you can see this subtle shift of color within a larger colored area, and it's just really nice. I might actually make these a bit more yellow just for the sake of having variety. And this is all filled in on my sketch. This is all dark. Okay, I need a little more paint, keep running out, not mixing enough. I'm working about 7 by 9, I think. It's about the same ratio as 8.5 by 11, but a little bit smaller. It's kind of like continuing this series of giant animals, little people, or little people, normal-sized animals. But I think it's just giant animals. Because the tree leaves are way bigger than the ferret, or like way smaller than the ferret thing. Is that the color? I probably want it to be darker. Because it's actually quite a dark, it's in a silhouette. Oh wow, look at that. I love this color, but it's not the color I want. That could actually work. So it's good to always keep the edge wet if you want an even wash. So I just colored in the ferret, tried to make it a nice flat-ish wash for the most part, as flat as I could. And this could also be the tree trunk, but I might make it darker. I'm overlapping it over the leaves just to add a bit of shading. Okay, so at this point I want to use my hairdryer to dry everything, see what values I have to work with, how dark everything is, and then I'll work on the character and the hill a bit more. I'll work on everything a little bit more, but first I want to dry it. And the hairdryer can like push color around, so it's good to keep that in mind. But I've never really had problems using a hairdryer, so here we go. So just like 30 seconds later and it's dry and I can just keep painting. Hairdryers are great. Okay, so this hill needs to be darker. So I'm gonna mix up a nice green color for that. I think I need to get rid of some of this green off my palette. Mix up a new one. This yellow is so bright, I'm not used to it, but it's nice. The thing I love most about watercolor is how easy the paint physically mixes on the palette because it's water. That's kind of what keeps me from using acrylic too much, because it just takes so much work to mix things. And that sounds kind of lazy, but it's true. Like this is just easier. It's so much easier. let the brush do some of its natural little, let the brush show what the brush can do. Let the brush stroke show. I guess that's all I was trying to say with that. It's gonna go in and add darker leaves here and there and leave some of the lighter areas. Where I think it needs more contrast, that's where it will be darker. So like here, the hill got kind of dark, so this will get even darker to make the hill look lighter. I want to add a bit of shading to the ferret. It's going to be purple. Just going to see how it looks down here first. Yeah, I think that's what I want. Okay. Just adding some texture to the fur. Okay, I want her to have a little bit more contrast on her because she's very light. And I think she needs some more. So now comes a point where I want to add some pencil on top. And I think it'd be easier if I took the tape off now. Because it needs outlines. So the way I do this depends on each painting. Each painting is different, each one has different needs, but I just like to start with taking some darker versions of the colors I already used, like some dark browns, dark purples, dark greens, and just start adding in line art. But I don't like to add it all the way around every single object because that will kind of really flatten it. I don't know how this is going to look, but we're going to try. No, I wish I had a, maybe this will work. Yeah, just like a little bit of, just take the edge off the darkness. That actually needs to be filled in with some sky color because this, all of this should be not part of the ferret. Pencil can really add a lot of life to it if the watercolor kind of took that away, because I find you can just add very subtle hue changes with it. So if I want certain areas to be warmer, you can go in with the pencil and lightly add it, and the texture of the pencil kind of works well with the watercolor. Just adds a little contrast, nice little pop. And you can also outline with it, and I like outlining with pencil because I just can't get the same look with watercolor because paintbrush strokes, when you're trying to make them very fine and accurate, it tends to kind of lose its energy. So when you use dry media to do lines, it keeps the energy, because sketching with like a pencil is so easy to do, but with a brush, it's hard to get that same sort of feeling, if you know what I mean. So that's why I like to use lines. It's also easier, and I've just accepted the fact that my watercolor workflow is like 30% pencil and like 70% watercolor, maybe even more pencil than that. So that has to go there. I keep losing track of which one is my phthalo blue, because I really like phthalo blue. It's a very good addition to my palette that I just hadn't had before, and I should have, because it's a great color. It just allows you to mix these really nice blues that you wouldn't be able to mix otherwise. So I really hope you enjoyed seeing my little watercolor tutorial walkthrough of my process, and I hope you got some little tips and tricks here and there, and if you like the art, you can buy a print of it on my shop. So I really hope you enjoyed this and got something from the video, and I'll see you in my next video.